Hello and welcome back to another Dare to Game video. Today we are creating our tier list for all the games I've played in 2024. So this will kind of be short little review sort of stuff. Not a ton of that, I'm mostly just ranking. But if you've seen one of these videos that I've done in the past, basically the premise is, as someone who creates gaming videos on YouTube, I play more games than the average person, or at least certainly more than I would if I wasn't making videos, because a lot of the games that I end up playing are games that I regret playing. So I like to, at the end of the year, go back and just, go through all the memories, watch some of the videos that I produced throughout the year, and remember exactly where I would realistically rank these games. And I find that the best way, instead of just ranking them in a row, is to do them on a tier list. And I also like to provide baseline comparisons so people can see, like, okay, well, if I rank this one as an S tier, what does that mean? What does that compare to a previous game? I don't rank them just for the year. So this isn't, like, one of these games isn't going to be S tier for 2024. It's only S tier if it's always S tier in comparison to every game ever made. Okay, so does that make sense? So for that, I'll be starting off with some baseline ones, one for each tier, historically speaking, from games that have existed forever, and I will explain what each tier means. So we'll start off with S tier, which is the masterpiece tier. So the example that I'm going to be using for the masterpiece tier is The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt. It's critically acclaimed, and most users that have played it generally agree it's one of the just all-around best games ever made. Not that it never had any flaws or anything, but it is phenomenally good, and the DLC they add later only makes it infinitely better. So, rich characters, expansive, open, immersive open world, tons of gameplay elements that are all really well made and fit together well to make it just a full, fantastic experience. So that's what it takes to be an S-tier game, in my opinion. Personally, I don't believe that there's such a thing as a perfect game, because I would only put like 3 games ever in the S-tier, and all of them could use tiny little mods here and there to make them something that I like a little bit more. So that's why I don't believe in a perfect game, but I do believe in an S-tier game, and The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt is the example I like to use for that, because it's so good. So that's our example for the S-tier. Next we have the A-tier, or the excellent tier, and for that example I'm going to use Skyrim. And now I move Skyrim around in my ranking personally between A and B tiers, just depending on certain things, but generally speaking, as a consistent rule, I like to keep it as an A-tier game, just because it is an excellent game. Open world RPG, known for its freedom, exploration, great modding community, which I think is what helps get it from the B tier into the A tier, held back slightly at the time of release by bugs, dated mechanics, and of course now comparing it so long afterwards, maybe you would rank it lower now, but when it came out, and then for a long time, this game just really held its own. So Skyrim is the example I like to use as the A tier. I will always accept arguments for it to be in the B tier because of things like dated graphics and the story being weaker than previous entries, but it's still a tremendously fun game, and the mods make it so good. So that's my example for A tier. B tier, which is our great tier, is where I'll put Assassin's Creed Black Flag, and I know some people will disagree with me on this one, but in my opinion, it's the best Assassin's Creed game. I think Assassin's Creed peaked at Black Flag, and, games since then, I'm not saying none have ever been good or fun. I liked Origins. But, I think this one personally holds up the best. It's the only one I ever replay, let's put it that way. So, fun, very polished experience, generally speaking, and the naval combat is a lot of fun. It's arcadey, but it's very, very fun. But we're starting to see some downsides, so repetitive gameplay loops and all of your stereotypical weaknesses of Assassin's Creed games like tail missions and stuff like that. So it has weaknesses, it has flaws, but it's a very polished experience with a good story, and it's a lot of fun to play. So that's what we're doing with B tier. C tier is our good tier, and that's where I'll put Far Cry 4. So this is the last Far Cry game that I consider any good at all. I played 5 and really did not care for it, and then I never played any after that. But Far Cry 4 is still what I would consider a quote good game. So it's got enjoyable gameplay, it's got a large open world, but, like most Far Cry games, sort of a predictable story and formulaic design, and that's a Ubisoft problem as a whole. But Far Cry 4 is still what I would consider good. It's playable, it's fun, I've played through it multiple times and enjoyed it multiple times, but it definitely has visible flaws that generally define Ubisoft as a company. So that's a good game. I could not possibly justify putting it any higher than that or any lower than that. So that's why I have Far Cry 4 right there at C tier for good. And that's where our sort of positive rankings end. D and below obviously are not good. So D tier is mediocre. And for that one we have Mass Effect Andromeda. Andromeda. And some people will fight me on this and say it belongs even lower, but I believe it really exemplifies D tier. So, features interesting mechanics and combat, but it suffers from serious technical issues, very weak animations, and extraordinarily lackluster writing compared to the earlier entries. So, it's not unplayable, but it's definitely not good. You know, that's D tier, that's mediocre. You can play it, some people will enjoy it, but it has ridiculous flaws. So that's why it goes in the mediocre category. I would say not lower than that. I could hear arguments for lower than that, but I think Mass Effect Andromeda is a really good example of an extraordinarily mediocre game. Next we move to E tier, which is bad. These are bad games, and for there we got Aliens, Colonial Marines. So, poor AI, technical issues, false advertising, which left players disappointed despite the promising source material. This one is just a letdown. Even if you could play it, even if it didn't have all of the major flaws, there's nothing redeeming about it in the E tier. It's a bad game. You know, you can't make the argument that it could be bumped up into mediocre. It's bad. And then we have F tier, which is terrible. These are the games that are widely considered to be the worst ever made, whether they're totally unpolished, whether it's a totally different game than what was promised, or whether the poor mechanics, rushed development, lack of polish, whatever the case may be, just makes it a horrible, unplayable game. And of course, the example for that is E.T. the Extraterrestrial for Atari 2000. This is a game that, I mean, they buried millions of copies of it in the desert. It's such a hilarious story that you might think I'm making that up if you've never heard of it before. But it's that bad of a game. They made so much of it because they were like, well, people loved the movie, they're going to love this game. But then the game was horrible. It was something that, it's so bad, so boring, so unenjoyable that you would rather do almost anything than play that game. It's not just that you don't, you know, it's not that it's not good enough to want to play it, it's that it's so bad that you would actively avoid it, right? So that's what it takes to get into F tier, in my opinion. That's why not a lot of games make it into F tier in my rankings. It's decently easy to get into D tier. You gotta work hard to get into E tier, in my opinion. But a lot of games, especially nowadays, definitely are. But F tier is hard to get into. So those are our baselines. Now you're going to notice I don't have a lot of pictures down there at the bottom. There's 8. That's because that's all I've played this year. 2024 has been a horrible year for gaming. I'm not saying there's been no good games. I've been hearing good things about Marvel Rivals. I haven't played it, but I've been hearing good things. And a couple other games throughout the year that I did not play. But these are the ones that I did play, and so I'm going to rank them accordingly. So we'll just go down the row for these ones because, you know, I don't need to put them in any specific thing up here. And we'll start with Call of Duty Black Ops 6. And as a general rule for me, Call of Duty games, typically, outside of your, you know, outliers like, you know, Infinite Warfare, Advanced Warfare, Ghosts, ones that are just widely recognized as being pretty atrocious games, Call of Duty games always fall in B or C tier, okay? And for Black Ops 6, C tier game at best. It's Modern Warfare 3 was better than it. I would put Modern Warfare 3 to B tier. Call of Duty Black Ops 6 is a C tier game. It's just not as good. It feels worse. You know, the general map layout, design, combat, all that sort of stuff. It's still a Call of Duty game, so it's if you buy it and play it, it's going to be exactly what you expect. It's a Call of Duty game, and it's a Black Ops game, so it has Nuketown. Like, those are facts in gaming that we know, so it's nothing that's going to blow your skirt up. But it is still a Call of Duty game, so it will be at least as good as almost every other Call of Duty game. So, C tier is really where you have to put that. It's not bad enough. There's nothing about it that's bad enough to put it into D tier for me, but there's also nothing about it that's good enough to put it into B tier. So it starts as a strictly C tier game. Then we're going to come out the door swinging with Dragon Age Veilguard, which honestly, E tier game. And I know that there are a lot of bots out there that really seem to have very vague, you know, one-line reviews for this game. It's a great game. I enjoyed it. Is game good? You know, those type of reviews that you'll see boosting scores when large, expensive games like this start to flounder. It's not a good game. And I'm going to have a video in a couple days talking about bad games of this year, and I will go more in depth with reviews on this one. But Dragon Age the Veilguard, just rough information. It was released on October 31st, 2024 for PlayStation 5, Xbox Series X and S, and PC. It's set in the world of Thetis, supposedly, but it does such a horrible job of continuing the Dragon Age story that if you are a fan of the franchise, you're very likely to hate this game. And if you're a newcomer, there's nothing about it to make it enjoyable or memorable or anything like that. Like I said, I'll get in depth when I do my video of worst games of 2024. But for now, I don't like this game. It's bad. Everything about it is bad. And I'm not even the biggest Dragon Age fan. I've played previous games in the series, and they're typically B tier games in my opinion, you know, at best, and at worst C tier games. This one's not though. It's a terrible game, or I should say bad game, because I put it in an E. It's not unplayable. It's not ET levels, but it's close. It's borderline. So, like I said, coming out the gate swinging with that one. I don't normally start with such negative things, but since we did that, now we can go to Dragon's Dogma 2, which I would put at B tier. I enjoyed Dragon's Dogma 2. Not saying it didn't have flaws, so it's not A tier. It's nowhere near S tier, so that's not even a discussion. I know some people will say it is, and they might get mad, but it's, in my opinion, it's definitely not. But of course, that's, you know, founded or based on my personal gameplay desires and stuff that I like. Objectively speaking, I think it's a B tier game. It's got a solid and entertaining enough story. Some of the mechanics are kind of hollow, but everything pretty much works really well. It entertained me, which is definitely a core requirement for it to get a B tier or above rating. Like, I was entertained the whole time I played it. Had a decent amount of RPG stuff going on, so it was enough to keep the RPG nerd in me entertained. So Dragon's Dogma 2 is definitely a game that I will recommend playing. Again, basic information, it was released on March 22nd, 2024 for PlayStation 5, Xbox X, and PC, etc. It was an action RPG sequel with expanded world exploration and deeper combat mechanics, or at least that's how they advertised the game. I liked it, had fun playing it. Kind of shallow, a little bit less than I expected, because when I started playing it, I had heard a lot of good things. It definitely wasn't a major letdown, but it wasn't anything that blew my skirt up. So B tier is where I feel is pretty safe to put Dragon's Dogma 2. Our next one is Helldivers 2, which is honestly another B tier game for me. I mean, I like space racism as much as the next guy, but it's hard. It would be hard for me to justify putting it any higher than this. Definitely solid enough mechanics. Helldivers has its, you know, core base of people who really, really enjoy it, and then everybody else either has only heard of it or hasn't. You know, it's not something with broad appeal, I would say. But as far as it goes, a Helldivers game, well enough. Fairly polished. It was released early in the year on February 8th for PS5, Windows. It's a co-op shooter, so it's definitely a game that you gotta play with someone if you want to enjoy it. But if you do, it can be fun. So Helldivers 2 is a B tier game in my opinion. Star Wars Outlaws is, in my opinion, a D tier game. I believe in my review I called it painfully mediocre. It is one of those games that the game technically works, and when I say technically, I don't mean it's technically a marvel. No, it technically works, as in I was able to play the game without any major problem. That being said, there's almost nothing in it to work. It's just this empty husk of a game by corporation, like, or a game by committee, you know, something that it feels like it was designed for mass appeal, but with absolutely no real person in mind. Very bland, very mediocre. Everything about it falls under that category. The gunplay is not great. The speeders and ship exploration aspects, at first, like, they have this mirage of maybe being fun when you first do them, but it takes about 5 minutes for that to wear off, and then they're just numb. I guess would be the best word to describe how I feel about them. Just nothing there. And there's absolutely nothing exciting or that you look forward to in those aspects. Like I said, the gunplay is pretty horrible. Stealth is bad. It's awful. The AI is so inconsistent. And again, the problem is I'm playing as a Star Wars Outlaw. Maybe a little bit of stealth feels good in there. You know, a little bit for some sneaking around, or make it optional. This game really leans into it, and stealth games in general aren't my thing. This one's a really bad stealth game, which makes it especially not my thing. So, horrible there. The main character, I don't even remember her name. At this point, making this video, I played the game a decent amount. I finished it. In fact, I think I might have gotten all the achievements and everything. It's not good. It is not a good game. It's not a memorable game. I barely remember the story. There's something about a heist I remember, and she's wanted. And there were different games, and I think Emilia Clarke was in the game, or the person who she played in one of the movies. It's not good. It's very forgettable. Like I said, painfully mediocre. So D tier is, I feel very confident about placing it there. Our next one is not technically a game, but it's decent sized, and considering it's better than most of the other stuff that I've done on this list, I'm going to include it, and I did play it this year, and that's Elden Ring: Shadow of the Erdtree. This is another one that was straddling the line, but I'm going to leave it in B tier. And now, this one, it could straddle into A or C tier, but I think it would be hard for me to argue it into A. I think if I was going to move it somewhere, I'd be more likely to move it down. And so, it makes it into B tier for me because it's basically just more Elden Ring. And Elden Ring is what I would consider a fairly B tier game. I know a lot of people think that's sacrilege. It's just, that's where I feel like it belongs. It's fine. The game, like the world of the game is very beautiful. A lot of the stuff in the world, including like player character, weapons, armor, super low resolution. Most people might not notice that because of the like artistic design choices they make and the like motion blurring that you get in the game a lot. But as someone who harvests in-game assets a lot for my videos and analyzes stuff like that, it's really low resolution. And if you look at that for even a couple seconds, you really start to notice it, and it can be a bit hard on the eyes because of how fuzzy everything is. And it's fuzzy by design. They do that to kind of hide the fact that their engine is doing what is a very large and impressive world. That being aside, all the graphics aside, FromSoft's storytelling does not mesh with me. It's fine. I found some of the things in the game as a whole interesting. Most of it not really though, it just doesn't really trip my trigger. I like the combat. Kind of. I like that there's more freedom in it than previous FromSoft games, I'll put it that way, because it makes the combat slightly easier to enjoy. Because my problem with FromSoft's combat is is the problem with all Souls-like games that I have in general, which is that it's a lazy way to make combat. They just make every single enemy a damage sponge who tanks the shit out of your hits, but also is incredibly fast, very maneuverable, and can one-hit you. Like, that's not good combat. It's just hard combat, and it's not hard in a way that makes sense. It's hard in a way that only exists because you wrote it to make, to work that way. If you can't hit any of the tropes exist for a reason, If you've got this big tanky enemy who takes all this damage, they're typically not that nimble, right? And their damage output is not anywhere near what you'd get from a DPS enemy. And your DPS enemies might deal a lot of damage. They might even be pretty dang fast. They're glass cannons, though. If you can hit them, they should be taking a bunch of damage. It should be not easy to kill them because they can move fast and deal a lot of damage. But if you design a game specifically to try and piss people off who are playing it, you shouldn't be surprised when people don't like that. Now, like I said, I've played pretty much all of the Souls games all the way through. I don't think any of them are unplayably hard. I think they're annoyingly artificially hard. Not so hard that I can't beat them, but definitely hard that while I'm playing it, I think, wow, they sure didn't have a story to tell, so they padded the runtime. That's just the feeling I get. Again, this is coming from someone who plays a lot of games, and so every time I play a game, I'm comparing it to every other game I've ever played. And that's why I can't possibly... Elden Ring's the highest ranked FromSoft game in my opinion, and I could not ever make an argument for putting it higher than B tier. That being said, Shadow of the Erdtree, it's just more of the same, so that's why it makes it into B tier. Even though it was a little bit too short, like I was expecting more out of that expansion. But anyway, that's a lot of words. It's probably the longest section I discussed for this entire video, and it's for what was a short story DLC for a game that was released a couple years ago. So that's not a great indication of the quality of games released in 2024. Next up, we have Farming Simulator 25, which is a C-tier game. It's not bad. I want to be clear about that. I enjoy Farming Simulator 25, but it is just a farming simulator game. At their best, any simulator game is only C tier by definition, in my opinion. They're playable. They're not exciting. They're not groundbreaking. They're usually iterative, and they feel a lot like the previous games, but you can play them for a long time. They're playable. If you release a simulator game that's not playable, that's immediately F tier, because the only thing a simulator game has to be is playable. So by default, if a simulator game works well, it just goes into C tier. It's just where it belongs. It is what it is. And Farming Sim 25, that's what it falls under. I enjoy the game. It's a lot of fun to play. I think that a lot of people were expecting something groundbreaking, but that's because they'd only ever played one other farming sim game, and they didn't know that there are small changes made over time, and the AI gets better. That's really the only major upgrade that usually happens in farming sim games, and the graphics. But that's it. It's still just a farming sim game. So if you were playing 22 and upgraded to 25 expecting something massive, that was on you, buddy. But yeah, solid C tier game. I'll probably be playing it for years, but it's a simulator, so that's where it belongs. And lastly, we have Skull and Bones. And now this one, I had to decide for a while whether it belonged in bad or just mediocre. And honestly, I have to use my other games as a reference point for this one, because it's playable. You can play the game. And they were clear before release about what the game was. They didn't, not the whole time before release, because obviously this game was in development for 75 years. So, the vision changed several times throughout that development process, but you know, for like a whole year or two before release, they were pretty clear about what it was going to be, and that is what they released. So I can't hold it against them for that and say, well, they didn't deliver this stuff because they had said they weren't going to. I think it's a D tier game. I played it a decent amount when it came out. I made some videos for it. I enjoyed some of the aspects of it. I will still say to this day, the open world, like the part when you're in your ship sailing around, is a pretty beautiful world, like the ocean and everything. That being said, that's kind of all it is. And I'll go in depth because this one will make its appearance on my worst games of 2024 video, as will some of the other ones that I've covered in this list, which makes sense considering the other games I played. But anyway, it is a really bad pirate game. Let me just put it that way. If you want to play a game where you are playing in a multiplayer gank fest with a bunch of people you're never going to meet and can't really talk to all that well, with mostly pointless objectives, it's fairly good at that. If you want to play a pirate game, play a different pirate game. It's painfully mediocre. It's playable, much like Star Wars Outlaws, but there's not much there. It is, and the worst part about it is, at least for Star Wars Outlaws, I didn't buy the game. I got it for the, what was it, the Ubisoft Plus or whatever, the subscription thing. I just paid for a month of that. It's like, I don't even remember, $7 or $15 or whatever the heck it cost, and then played the game in a month and then canceled the subscription, and that was it. So at least I didn't feel like I got screwed for that one. I paid full price for Skull and Bones, and I knew it was going to be bad. I paid full price for it specifically because I was going to make YouTube videos about it. And if I wasn't going to, I never would have played it because I knew when this was coming out exactly what it was going to be, and I was 100% right, and it's painfully mediocre. So that is all 8 of the games that I played enough to feel confident ranking on here. I'm going to be, like I said, in a couple days I'll be doing a more detailed look at the worst games of 2024. That will include some of the ones on this video and some other ones, and I'll explain more of that when I'm doing that video, but you don't have to play a game all the way through to know that it's horrible. Let me just put it that way. So hope you enjoyed this video. I would love to know if you've played any of these games and feel differently about them, or just about anything that I said in this video, because, man, do I really love that type of stuff. So definitely leave it in the comment section below. But that is all for today. Hope you enjoyed this video. Hope it made sense, and we'll see you next time. Thanks for watching another Dare to Game video. If you liked this video, please leave a like and a comment. If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to the channel. If you like my content and would like to support this channel, consider becoming a member today for as little as $1.99 a month. It makes a huge difference. But in any case, thanks for watching and have a nice day. I'll see you next time.